there's a bit of a thunderstorm going on, and I thought it gave us a nice little ambiance. Today we're going to be revisiting the Ask Me Anything subreddit. I have been loving these, and this one sounds so interesting. If you aren't familiar with this subreddit, it's basically an open floor discussion, so OP will put their prompt. So far we've read AMAs from a stalker and from a former inmate, and this one says, I lived in a forest for 2 months without any contact with civilization. Ask me anything. Basically an open floor discussion, people can ask their questions and OP will answer them. So they said, for 2 months, I lived alone in a forest, completely cut off from civilization. It was a drastic but necessary decision after my life fell apart. No electricity, no internet, just me, the wilderness, and the daily struggles to survive. I learned to hunt, build my own shelter, and find water, but the real challenge was facing the solitude. So somebody asked, where did you live during that time? How was the weather? Did you encounter any animals? When and how did you fall asleep at night? Weren't you scared in that pitch darkness out in the wilderness? How much did it cost you? Were you able to find a job when you were back? What about your parents and family? Weren't they worried? Were you in contact with them? Any Netflix or no phone at all? OP says, I lived in a basic shelter that I built. The weather during my 2 months was a mix of warm days with occasional thunderstorms. I was able to stay warm enough with the shelter though, and kept a fire going for heat when I needed it. I did encounter a few animals, some smaller like squirrels, chipmunks, and birds, and some were definitely on the larger side. I saw white-tailed deer a few times, especially in the early mornings or near water sources. I also came across a moose, which was pretty wild to see. I also came across black bears, not up close, but I did find fresh tracks a few times, which definitely kept me on edge. At night, I fell asleep pretty quickly, honestly. The darkness was a bit unnerving at first, but after a while, I just got used to it. The sounds of the forest became oddly calming, and it helped me feel grounded. Being in total silence, away from all the city noise, gave me a sense of peace. There were some moments of fear, especially in the middle of the night when the forest felt really alive with sounds, but I reminded myself that I was prepared and safe in my shelter. As for the cost, it wasn't much at all. I only spent money on the basic supplies I brought with me, things like food for the first 2 weeks, a good knife, a fire starter. The rest was just relying on what the land provided. It was a minimal budget, but it was enough to get me through. When I got back, I didn't rely on just finding one job position. I ended up building another company. My parents and family were definitely worried. I didn't stay in regular contact with them. I sent a brief message before heading out and told them I'd be back in 2 months. They knew I was going to be off the grid, so they weren't expecting constant updates. It was hard to explain the experience to them when I returned because they didn't fully understand why I needed that time away. I didn't use my phone, so no Netflix, no social media, nothing. I went completely offline. That is so crazy to me that you essentially set yourself up for the first 2 weeks with food and stuff like that, and after that, it was just survival. Like, that's crazy. Do you notice some sort of mental acuity or difference in perception during and after the experience? Like, there's a fog being lifted off your mind or something. And they said, I felt like my brain shifted into a totally different mode. Without all the constant noise of modern life, notifications, small talk, deadlines, it felt like a fog I didn't even realize was there started lifting. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before, like subtle changes in the weather or the ways animals behaved. My thoughts felt sharper, more focused, and I started to appreciate the simplicity of just existing in the moment. After coming back, that clarity stuck around for a bit, but it faded as I got back into the chaos of everyday life. Still, I would catch myself tuning into small things like how trees sway in the wind or the sound of the rain hitting a window, and it would bring me back to that mindset. It's like my brain got a reset, even if the effect wasn't permanent. Someone said, did you go into it planning for 2 months, or were you just seeing how it goes, and what made you come back? I originally went into it with a loose plan for 2 months, but honestly, it was more of a let's see how it goes kind of thing. I didn't have a strict end date, just a general idea of how long I could stretch my supplies and keep myself going. I started missing the comforts of my old life, upper class lifestyle, talking about the things like a warm bed, hot showers, good food, and even the convenience of being able to grab a coffee or order takeout. I also missed the social parts of that life, like laughing with friends over dinner, having deep conversations, and even the silly material things like dressing up or just feeling clean and polished. I genuinely think the social aspect is what would be the hardest. Obviously, survival and like having to find food and water sources, that's a different story. But I just feel like not being able to talk to anyone or communicate with anybody and like not even being able to laugh at anything, like there's just nothing. It's just you and silence. Someone said, do you remember it fondly or as a low point? or both? They said, honestly, it's a bit of both. There were moments that felt amazing, like connecting with nature, figuring stuff out on my own, and just living a super simple life. But not having contact with other humans for that long can really mess with your mental health. The loneliness hits harder than you would expect, and you start having these weird internal battles. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I still look back on it with a lot of pride. And you should. I think that's like an amazing thing that you accomplished. But yeah, no, the mental health thing is, literally what I was just saying. I can't imagine. Someone said, can you elaborate on those internal battles? It sounds fascinating. At first, it was mostly about self-doubt, wondering if I had made the right decision to leave everything behind. I constantly questioned whether I was doing the right thing by being isolated. At times, I felt totally disconnected from the life I had before. I questioned whether I was actually running away from my problems instead of facing them. I wondered if I was just hiding, avoiding life because I didn't want to deal with the mess I had made back in the real world. Then there was loneliness. I was missing the feeling of being a part of something bigger. The solitude made me realize how much I depended on external validation and social interactions to define myself. Out there was no one to impress or please, which was freeing but also disorienting. I had to figure out who I was without all of those outside influences. I would think about the relationships I had back home, friends, family, and realize how disconnected I felt. I started to wonder if I even mattered to anyone. Being out there, cut off from everything, made me face the fact that I didn't know who I was when no one else was around me to define me. That is insane because, oh my god, and that's not the end. But the most dramatic internal battle was with fear. Not about survival, but about confronting my past. One night, I was sitting by the fire, and I couldn't stop thinking about past mistakes. It felt like the darkness of the forest was amplifying everything I regretted. I started thinking about opportunities I'd missed, people I had hurt, and decisions that seemed to haunt me. The longer I sat with it, the more intense it became. I felt physically sick, like the weight of my past was crushing me, and there was nowhere to run. For the first time, I couldn't distract myself with work or social media. And there was no way to avoid facing the fact that I had to let go of my guilt or it would keep eating at me. It was in that moment that I realized how much of my life had been driven by distractions like work, social media, relationships. I was always looking for something outside of myself to fill me, but out there, I had no choice but to face the silence and deal with my own mind. It was painful, but also liberating. That is, just the way that is written is so beautiful, honestly. But yeah, it takes something like this for you to realize that you actually haven't dealt with your issues. You've just put things in their place. Like a breakup, for example. Instead of getting over the feelings and the pain from the breakup, you just get into a new relationship. People are constantly distracting themselves instead of dealing with the core issues, and that's why I think therapy is amazing and everybody should go to therapy. Someone said, I'm assuming you had little experience in survival in the outdoors, so how did you learn to do things like hunt and make camp? And what was the hardest skill to learn? I didn't have much experience going in, but I had done a lot of research beforehand. I watched videos, read survival books, and practiced some basics like fire starting and simple knots before heading out. Honestly, a lot of it was trial and error once I got there. Building my own shelter was one of the first big challenges. I used fallen branches and leaves to create something basic but sturdy. It wasn't pretty, and it definitely needed a lot of tweaking, but it kept me dry and safe enough. Hunting, though, that was a whole different beast. I had no experience with it beforehand, and it was easily the hardest skill to pick up. I relied more on fishing, which was more forgiving, and foraging because hunting takes way more patience and practice than I expected. The first few attempts were just me sitting there, hoping something would magically walk into view. It didn't. The hardest part overall wasn't even the technical stuff. It was figuring out how to stay calm when things went wrong. Yeah, I would have a meltdown whenever things went wrong. I don't think I'd be able to do that. But honestly, it would probably be good like exposure therapy for me. Because if I was sitting there for like 2 hours waiting for something to walk by so I could eat, oh, I would lose my mind. Like, I quit. I'm done. I'm going home. Would you recommend this to others? I've been thinking of doing something like that at least once. They said I would definitely recommend it, but with a few things to consider. It's an incredible way to challenge yourself and reset your perspective, but you've got to be prepared. If you've been thinking about doing something like this, I say go for it, but start small. Try a shorter trip first, maybe a week. Just get used to being alone in the wild. Prepare thoroughly, know the area you're going to, and bring the right tools. A good knife, first aid kit, fire starter, etc. The mental aspect is huge though. Solitude can feel amazing at first, but it can also get overwhelming. Make sure you have a way to keep your mind busy, like journaling, practicing survival skills, or just paying attention to nature. Also, safety is key. Having a backup plan doesn't take away from the experience, but it keeps you alive. Where did you do this and why? I decided to do it because I needed a reset in my life. Things had fallen apart in a way that left me questioning everything, my choices, my direction, and even myself. I wanted to strip everything back and experience what it was like to live without all the guarantees and privileges that I had had since I was born. Growing up in a wealthy, upper-class life in New York, I'd always had everything I needed at my fingertips: comfort, security, and access to anything I wanted. This was about challenging myself, stepping out of that bubble and seeing what it felt like to rely on nothing but my own effort. No cushy safety nets, no conveniences, just me and the basics of survival. It was partly an escape, but also a way to find out who I was without all the things I'd always taken for granted. Being able to identify the privileges that you have and that you've had your entire life and wanting to challenge. I just think that's amazing. I love how you said seeing what it felt like to rely on nothing but my own effort. I have no words. This is amazing. How did the experience change you as a person? Did you develop any new habits, behavior, or refined capacity for something you couldn't do before? The experience definitely changed me. It forced me to slow down, reflect, and rely on myself in ways that I never had to before. One of the biggest changes was a shift in how I approached challenges. I used to overthink or rely on others to help solve problems, but out there, it was all on me. That built a sense of independence and resilience I didn't realize that I lacked. I also developed a deep appreciation for simplicity. Back home, I would chase after comfort or luxury without a second thought. But after living with so little, I realized how little I truly needed. It's made me more mindful of what I consume, whether it's food, resources, or even time. In terms of habits, I found myself continuing to practice things like daily journaling and spending more time outdoors. I even kept up on some of the survival mentality, like always having a plan or a backup for unexpected situations. Plus, I've become way more patient. When you're out in the wilds, you can't rush things. You just have to let nature take its course, so that mindset kind of stayed with me. Why is this making me want to go out into the woods for 2 months? What did you do to keep yourself entertained? Keeping myself entertained was mostly about staying busy. Survival tasks took up a good chunk of the day, like finding food, maintaining my shelter, and just making sure everything was in order. But when I wasn't doing that, I got creative. I would explore the area, upgrade my shelter, or just sit and listen to the forest. I brought a notebook and spent time journaling, writing random thoughts or sketching, badly. At night I would stargaze, which sounds cliche, but it was incredible. And yeah, I'll admit I talked to myself sometimes, just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. Oh, the way I would be having full-on conversations with myself and my imaginary friends, because I would be going insane. Literally, when I used to live by myself, I would talk to people who weren't there. That sounds insane. I don't mean it like that. I know they're not real, but sometimes you just start talking out loud. You're on a radio show. That's what I mean. I don't know why I worded it like that. The voices. Someone just asked, were you safe? For the most part, yeah, I felt pretty safe, but there were definitely moments that reminded me how vulnerable you can be out there. I was super cautious about wildlife, especially black bears. I kept my food stored away from my sleeping area and hung it in a tree at night. I never had a close encounter, but I did find some tracks nearby once, which was a good reminder to stay alert. The weather was another challenge. A couple of thunderstorms hit, and being alone in the woods during heavy rain and lightning was pretty intense. I hunkered down, made sure my shelter held up, and stayed dry as best as I could. The mental side of things was probably the toughest part though. I can't even imagine being able to build a shelter that would protect me from rain, because I would have holes everywhere. I would just have sticks lined up and then it would be drizzling through. So the fact that you were even able to make a shelter, and you said you were constantly upgrading your shelter if you were bored or whatever, but making shelter that can protect you from the rain, I'm impressed. This is fascinating. Thank you for sharing. What kind of shelter did you build, and was it legal to be where you were? Did you bring a cell phone for emergencies, and how many miles did you have to hike in? I built a basic lean-to shelter using fallen branches, logs, and a ton of leaves for insulation. That is so smart. It wasn't pretty, but it held up surprisingly well, even during rain. The hardest part was getting it to block wind. As for legality, it was technically public land, and I was careful not to damage anything or leave a trace. I kept my footprints as minimal as possible, leaving no trash behind. Staying low-key helped avoid any trouble. I did bring a cell phone, but it was offline the entire time to save battery, only there as an absolute last resort in case of emergencies. Luckily, I never had to use it. I hiked in about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead to make sure I was really isolated. It was far enough that I didn't see or hear anyone the entire time, which was exactly what I wanted. 15 miles. Did you have a watch? A calendar watch so you knew the date, or did you mark off the days in some other way? I didn't bring a watch partly because I wanted to fully disconnect from the rigid schedules of city life. Back home, everything revolved around the clock. Meetings, deadlines, alarms. It felt like my whole life was micromanaged by time. Out there, I wanted to break free from that and let the rhythm of the day dictate my pace instead. I kept track of the days by marking them in a small notebook, but I didn't worry about the exact time. If the sun was up, I worked. If it was down, I rested. It felt strange at first, but after a while, it was liberating not to be ruled by a watch or a calendar. It was one of the best parts of the whole experience, honestly. Honestly, that sounds so peaceful. How hard was it for you to reintegrate with society? Did you crave the solitude? Honestly, reintegrating wasn't as hard as I expected, probably because I've always been super social. Once I was back around people, it felt natural, like I hadn't missed a beat. That said, there's always moments where I caught myself missing the quiet and simplicity of being out there. Can you be more specific about how your life fell apart? Like what happened? It wasn't one big event, more like a bunch of things piling up. I was feeling totally disconnected from my life, just going through the motions without knowing why. My work, even though it paid well, felt meaningless, and I had been stuck in this cycle of chasing extreme success for no real reason. One of my companies started tanking, which threw me for a loop. Watching something I had built start to fall apart hit me way harder than I expected. On top of that, I started realizing how surface level a lot of my relationships and lifestyle were. Growing up with privilege, I always had this bubble of comfort, but it also made it hard to tell who actually cared about me, and not just what I could offer. Someone said, "What is the worst thing you had to eat while living out there?" They said the worst thing was probably cattail roots. I roasted them over the fire, but they turned out fibrous and starchy in the worst way, like chewing on a soggy rope. I'd read they could be decent survival food, but either I didn't prepare them properly or they're just not as good as people make them out to be. Not enjoyable at all, but it filled me up enough to keep me going. Okay, I got to the bottom. There are more comments, but I think I'm gonna end it here. I think we got pretty much all the information that we could get. A lot of them did start repeating. I think this is amazing. I don't think everybody is capable of doing something like this, but I think if you are capable, why not? You know, it's like, it's only 2 months and you don't even have to go for that long. I don't think I would survive. I don't, honestly. But I just think it's so important to experience things like this and whatever. It doesn't have to be this exact thing, but whatever would like equate for you. I don't know. I just think disconnecting, being alone with your thoughts and your feelings and being forced to figure out your thoughts and your feelings without distraction, I think that is so important. Like, you can never truly heal if you don't allow yourself to. And so, like I was saying, it might not be going out into the wilderness for 2 months, but whatever you need to do to be able to process what you need to process, I feel like it could benefit everybody. I just think this is so incredible, and an incredible and very impressive way to do so. But that's all I have for now. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys have any cool stories like this, or if you've ever done anything similar, I don't know, I would love to hear about it. So if you have any stories that you want to share with me or the community, I will have my subreddit linked down below. I have a tiny little ramble to do at the end of this, so I'm gonna go. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Okay, I'm gonna keep this short and sweet. If you guys want like a more detailed, I don't know, like explanation of what's going on, I have a video going up for my channel members, and I know that it's like insane to be like, oh, it's behind a paywall, but like I just can't sit here and explain it all. It takes too long. So I made a whole video on it for the channel members. Anyways, I just wanted to tell you guys that I am getting a sleep study done. If you guys have been watching my channel for a long time, you know I have struggled with chronic fatigue, extreme exhaustion for a majority of my life. As I get older, it becomes more and more debilitating, and it has really taken a toll on my mental health. It's really taken a toll just on my life in general, and I found a place that I did not need a referral for, and I'm going to do a sleep study in the next couple weeks. I'm not exactly sure when this video is going up because I'm pre-recording a ton right now because I have to wean off all of my medications, which is really scary. Again, I go into all of this in way more detail in like that video. I think the video is already up. It should be. But I'm pre-recording a bunch of videos because I'm not sure how I'm going to react once I've weaned off all my medications. I don't know what kind of state I'm going to be in. I don't know if I'm going to be able to work, so I'm trying to just get myself really ahead so I don't have to worry about it if I like can't do it. You know what I mean? All of that to say though, if it does come to a point where I cannot work and I'm not able to get videos out, and you guys are like, where the fuck does she go? Just know that it's temporary. I just had to wean off my meds and I'm dying slowly, but things will go back to normal hopefully after my sleep study. I'm able to get right back on my medications once the study's over. But if I do disappear, that is why. I'm just giving you a little bit of an explanation, but that is all for now. I'm gonna go. I love you guys so very much. See ya.